Rain had a way of making Willow Creek look more honest. Dirt roads turned dark, the wooden storefronts glistened, and the whole town seemed to quiet down long enough for folks to hear their own thoughts. On this particular evening, Evelyn Hart wished her own thoughts would silence themselves. She clutched the thin shawl around her shoulders as she walked toward the old boarding house, boots splashing through shallow puddles. At 26, with a past the town never let her forget, she moved like someone bracing against a blow she hadn't yet taken. Everyone knew her story, or thought they did. Everyone whispered the same word behind her back: used. A woman who had been married, divorced, abandoned, and blamed for a husband's wrongdoing. Her ex-husband had gambled away their savings, lost their land, then vanished into the mountains, leaving debts in her name. Somehow, no matter how hard she worked sewing, scrubbing, baking, no matter how many hours she put in, she was still the one judged. Folks didn't want to hear the truth, because gossip was cheaper than compassion. Evelyn stopped beneath the overhang of the mercantile when she heard two women nearby. "Poor thing thinks she'll find work again," one muttered. "She ain't poor. She's foolish," the other replied. "Once a woman's been tossed aside like that, men don't look her way again." Evelyn lowered her head and walked faster. She had learned long ago that defending herself only gave people more to talk about. Better to be silent. Better to keep moving. But the silence wasn't as protective as she wished. Inside, Evelyn carried a storm she had no place to release. A storm made of fear, shame, anger, and the small, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, life wasn't finished with her yet. She reached the steps of the boarding house and exhaled shakily. Mrs. Rowan, the keeper, gave her a sympathetic smile, but little else. Sympathy didn't pay the bills. Evelyn owed 2 weeks' rent. One more missed payment, and she'd lose the tiny room she called home. That night, she lay awake listening to rain ping softly against the window glass. She stared at the cracked ceiling, trying not to think of her future. What kind of life could a woman rebuild without land, money, or family? What kind of peace could she hope for in a town determined to shun her? Miles away, another person lay awake, but for a very different reason. Caleb Donovan sat at the edge of his ranch house bed, elbows on his knees, watching the last ember in the hearth dim. The widowed cowboy had known grief intimately for the last 4 years. His wife, Lily, had been the heart of the Donovan ranch, and when she passed, the air itself seemed to sour. He raised his 3 children alone, 8-year-old Hannah, 10-year-old Jessie, and little Emma, who still asked why Mama couldn't come home. Caleb did his best, working sunup to sundown, patching fences, tending cattle, keeping the family afloat, not with ease, but with the quiet stubbornness that lived in his bones. Still, loneliness clung to him like dust he couldn't shake off. His foreman, Brander, had mentioned earlier that the Donovan place needed more help. The ranch was too large, Caleb too stretched thin. But hiring hands cost money, and he already had school supplies to buy, winter feed to stock, boots to replace. Besides, most of the hired help drifted in, drifted out. None stayed long. None felt like a piece of the home he was trying desperately to keep standing. He stood, rubbed his eyes, and sat back down as if the floor itself had grown too heavy. The thought came again, soft but insistent. You can't do this alone forever. But he didn't know how to let anyone in. Not anymore. Caleb woke at dawn, the sky a hazy lavender, and stepped out to the porch with a steaming mug of coffee. The air smelled of wet earth and the promise of one more day surviving. Jessie ran out next, holding a broken spur, asking if Caleb could fix it before school. Hannah followed, hair braided unevenly, already nagging Jessie to hurry up. Emma toddled sleepily behind them, clutching her wooden horse. Caleb looked at them, their small worries, their hopeful faces, and something inside him softened. He needed help. Real help. Family help. But help didn't come easy, and not many women wanted to step into a household of 3 rambunctious children and a man who still kept part of his heart locked away in memory. Later that morning, while Caleb rode out toward the south pasture to check on a downed fence, Evelyn Hart walked into the sheriff's office after being summoned. Sheriff Hilton leaned back in his chair with the expression of a man who disliked his job more than he admitted. "Evelyn," he said, scratching his beard, "I won't dance around it. The bank filed the paperwork. If you don't settle your debts by Friday, they'll seize your late husband's claim and anything you have of value. You've got what, 3 days?" Her stomach sank. "Yes, sir." "You got anyone who can help you?" "No, sir." He sighed. "Then you need work. Fast." "I've been looking." "Well, that's the other thing." He cleared his throat. "There've been complaints from folks saying they feel uncomfortable hiring you." Uncomfortable. The polite way of saying they believe the rumors. Evelyn swallowed. "So what am I supposed to do?" The sheriff hesitated. "There's a posting at the church. Someone's looking for a woman to help on a ranch. Says room and board included. You could try." Her heart stuttered. A ranch job? She had little experience besides housework, sewing, and caring for animals on her uncle's farm years ago. Still, desperate times demanded bravery she didn't feel. By afternoon, she stood in front of the church bulletin board, staring at the handwritten note pinned to the oak frame. The words were simple. Help wanted. Widower with 3 children. Cooking, cleaning, homestead care. Room and board included. Fair wages for the right woman. At the bottom, a name, Caleb Donovan. Evelyn traced the letters with her gaze. She had heard of him. Quiet, hard-working, a man who kept to himself. Some said he never smiled anymore. Some said he would never love again. But not one person had ever spoken ill of his character. And right now, that was enough. She inhaled, steadying her trembling fingers. Tomorrow, she would go to the Donovan Ranch. And maybe, if fate had not completely turned its back on her, tomorrow might also be the first day someone looked at her and saw more than the label everyone else used to tear her down. Sunrise warmed the horizon in shades of peach and rose when Evelyn set out the next morning. She'd barely slept, her nerves twisting into knots all night long. The Donovan Ranch lay a few miles outside town, far enough that wagons passed rarely, and the only company on the road was the hum of meadow larks and the soft murmur of wind through tall prairie grass. Evelyn's boots scuffed the dirt rhythmically, and with each step, doubt whispered beside her. What if he turns you away like everyone else? What if he's heard the rumors? What if this is another closed door? But her debts hung over her like storm clouds. She didn't have the luxury of fear. She didn't even have the luxury of failing. By the time the Donovan homestead came into view, her breath caught, not from the long walk, but from the sheer size of the ranch. The house was modest but sturdy, with a broad porch and a big barn behind it. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, and a few chickens pecked lazily near a wooden fence. It wasn't grand, but it felt honest, lived in, real. It was the opposite of the cold rooms she'd grown used to renting. Evelyn didn't notice the soft thud of boots until a voice spoke from behind her. "You looking for someone?" She spun around, nearly dropping the small carpet bag she'd brought. A tall man stood a few feet away, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his forearms, strong and browned from sun, and his dark hair was pushed back beneath the brim of a weather-worn hat. His face held the kind of quiet grief that time didn't erase. It only taught a man to carry it better. Her breath stilled. "Mr. Donovan?" He studied her for a moment. "That'd be me. I saw your posting. About needing help on the ranch." Caleb nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You're the first to come out this far." She didn't know if that was good or bad. He motioned to the porch. "Let's talk." Inside the house, warmth enveloped her. The living room was tidy but full of signs that 3 children lived here. Wooden toys, a half-finished puzzle, a pair of muddy boots by the hearth. Evelyn's pulse fluttered. This wasn't a temporary boarding room. This was a home. Someone's sanctuary. Could she really be part of something like this? Caleb set his rope on a hook near the door and gestured for her to sit. Miss, she corrected softly. Miss Evelyn Hart. He didn't react to the name, didn't flinch, didn't narrow his eyes or smirk the way townsfolk did. He simply nodded. All right then, Miss Hart. Tell me what you can do. Her hands twisted in her lap. I can cook, clean, tend animals. My aunt raised me after my parents died, and her farm was small. We all had to work. She hesitated. And I work hard. I don't quit easy. Caleb leaned back slightly, crossing his arms, not in skepticism, but in assessment. I need someone the kids can rely on when I'm out in the fields. Someone patient. Someone kind. I can be all those things, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. He held her gaze a few seconds longer than she expected, not in judgment, but in something like quiet consideration, a feeling she wasn't used to. All right, he said finally. Let me introduce you to the children. He rose, and Evelyn followed him through the house and out to the yard. She braced herself, unsure how children might respond to a stranger, especially one with a reputation she had not asked for. But the first child who spotted her was the smallest. Emma, with blonde curls tied in two short pigtails, looked up from a patch of dandelions and blinked at Evelyn with wide blue eyes. Emma beamed. Hi. The greeting hit Evelyn like sunlight. Warm, unguarded, free of prejudice. Hello, she managed, smiling back. Jessie and Hannah soon approached. Hannah with the careful curiosity of an older sister, Jessie with the cautious pride of a brother trying to judge if he approved. Evelyn knelt so she was level with their faces. I'm Evelyn, she said gently. Your father said you might need a little help around here. Hannah tilted her head. Are you a teacher? No. A nurse? No. Can you cook biscuits? Jessie demanded. She laughed softly. I can try. They both nodded, entirely satisfied by that answer. Caleb watched the exchange from a few steps back. His arms dropped to his sides. His shoulders eased. For the first time since she arrived, he wasn't studying her. He was simply seeing her. They all went inside, and Evelyn prepared a simple lunch to demonstrate her cooking. The kitchen was cozy, with old cast iron, a chipped but well-loved table, and curtains that had clearly been sewn by hand. She worked quietly, focusing on the rhythm of chopping vegetables, the sizzle of butter in a pan, the familiar comfort of feeding others. When she set plates on the table, the children were already bouncing in their chairs. Jessie took the first bite and froze. Evelyn tensed. Then he grinned. This is good. Really good, Hannah agreed. Emma smeared mashed potatoes across her face in approval. Caleb took a bite last. His jaw tightened for a moment, as if he wasn't used to being surprised. Then he nodded, the faintest hint of a smile touching his features. You cook like someone who means it, he said. Evelyn felt her throat thicken. I always do. After lunch, Caleb asked her to step outside again. They stood beneath the shade of a large oak, a breeze rustling its branches. I can offer room and board in the guest room, he said, and wages fair enough to help you get on your feet. But this ranch is a home first. My children come before everything. If you stay, I need someone who'll treat them with care. I would, she said, her voice firm. I will. He studied her face, searching again, for sincerity, maybe, or strength. Finally, he extended his hand. Then welcome to the Donovan Ranch. Evelyn stared at his outstretched hand, stunned. Just like that? Accepted? Trusted? Her fingers trembled as she placed her hand in his. That single touch, the warmth, the steadiness, felt like the first spark of something she had thought impossible. Belonging. But neither of them knew that accepting this job would ignite a chain of events that would change both their lives and challenge every cruelty the town had ever thrown at her. Evelyn moved into the Donovan guest room that very evening. She had expected awkwardness, maybe suspicion from the children, perhaps stiffness from Caleb, but instead the house carried a gentle hum, the kind that comes from a family still trying, still holding on, still hoping for more than just survival. She unpacked her few belongings, a worn dress, 2 blouses, a frayed journal, a ribbon her mother once tied in her hair, and placed them carefully in the small dresser. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a temporary tenant. She felt like someone who might stay. That night, she sat on the edge of the bed listening to the soft creak of floorboards and the distant murmurs of Caleb checking the barn before locking up. The sounds were warm, familiar, like the rhythm of a place that had room for her if she could prove herself worthy of it. Morning came early in a household with children. Before dawn had even brushed the horizon, she heard tiny feet thumping down the hallway. A moment later, Hannah knocked gently on her door. "Miss Evelyn, Emma can't find her boot." Evelyn smiled, tying her hair back as she stepped into the hall. The little boot was found behind the wood stove. Emma had used it as a horse barn. Evelyn helped her pull it on, tying the laces just tight enough to stay but loose enough to wiggle. Caleb entered the kitchen a moment later, rubbing sleep from his eyes and running a hand through his tousled hair. He paused when he saw Evelyn standing by the stove, already preparing breakfast. "You don't have to start this early," he said. "I'm used to early," she replied. "And the children were up. Figured I might as well get started." He watched her crack eggs into a pan, the warm scent of butter filling the room. There was something in his gaze she hadn't seen earlier, a quiet gratitude, or maybe relief. She wasn't sure, but it warmed her more than the stove fire. By the time the sun rose fully, the children were fed, the dishes cleaned, and the house felt alive in a way Evelyn couldn't fully explain. She hadn't been here long, but it felt right, natural, as if her presence filled a space she didn't know existed. After breakfast, Caleb showed her around the ranch. They walked past the barn where the horses nickered softly, past the vegetable garden that had gone wild since Lily's passing, and toward the chicken coop where hens darted around, clucking in complaint at anyone disturbing their day. "You'll help mostly in the house," Caleb said, lifting a bucket of feed. "But if you know anything about animals, that's a blessing too." "I grew up around chickens and cows," Evelyn said, gently coaxing a hen away from her skirt. "My aunt had a stubborn rooster named Reggie who chased me daily." Caleb chuckled, really chuckled, and the sound startled them both. It seemed rusty, as if it hadn't been used in a very long time. "You all right?" she teased gently. He shook his head. "Didn't expect you to be funny." "I didn't expect you to smile," she answered. Something shifted then, nothing obvious, nothing bold, just a fleeting moment where their eyes held, and both realized they didn't feel like strangers anymore. But the day's work didn't pause for tender moments. Caleb showed her the supply shed, the pump, the apple trees, the smokehouse, and the stretch of fencing needing repairs. "It's a lot," he warned. "Too much for one man, if I'm honest." Evelyn folded her hands. "Then it's good you're not alone anymore." He froze for a beat, the weight of her words settling in. Alone. He had been carrying that word for years. Hearing someone gently take it away shook something deep in him. Before he could respond, the sound of a horse trotting quickly toward the ranch caught their attention. Evelyn turned, startled, as a rider approached. Sheriff Hilton, hat low, face serious. Caleb stepped forward. "Morning, Sheriff." "Morning." Hilton nodded toward Evelyn. "Miss Hart, glad you're here. Saves me the walk to town." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" The sheriff cleared his throat, not meeting her eyes. "Your ex-husband's creditors posted a warning this morning. They're claiming you abandoned the debts. They're filing to take your property and belongings by week's end." "I don't have property," she whispered. "They're saying you owe more than you thought." He shifted in his saddle. "I'm sorry, Evelyn." Her breath hitched. She felt the old shame creeping up her spine, a cold hand she thought she'd outrun. I'm working now. I'll pay it back." Hilton's face softened. "Debt collectors won't care about that. They're coming Friday. 2 days." Her knees almost gave out. Caleb stepped closer, his presence steadying her without touching her. "That's enough, Sheriff," he said firmly. "You've delivered your message." Hilton tipped his hat and rode off. Evelyn's hands shook as she tried to inhale. I can't lose what little I have. I don't know what to do. Caleb didn't raise his voice or panic. He simply looked at her with the calm of a man who had weathered storms far greater. You're not going anywhere. Not while you work here. I can't drag your family into my problems, she whispered, tears threatening. You didn't drag anything, he said. Trouble found you, same as it finds anyone trying to build a life. His voice was low, steady, strong, like a beam across a broken roof. You have a place here, he told her, and I'm not letting anyone take that from you. She shook her head, overwhelmed. Why are you being so kind to me? Because my children like you, he said. Because you work hard. Because you carry burdens you shouldn't have to. Because not everyone believes what the town says. Her heart clenched. And, he added, meeting her watery gaze, because no one deserves to stand alone. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Caleb hesitated only a moment before lifting a hand to gently wipe it away. His touch was warm, hesitant, protective, but not possessive. Not demanding. Just human. Kind. The kind she had gone years without. The moment was interrupted by Hannah calling from the porch. Pa. Miss Evelyn. Emma's trying to feed a frog to the cat. Caleb let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. The tension broke. Evelyn sniffed softly and managed a tiny smile. Go on, she whispered. Your house needs you. Our house, he corrected without thinking. The words hung there between them. Unexpected, unplanned, powerful. He froze after saying them, as if realizing too late what had slipped out. But Evelyn heard it, felt it. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like an outsider desperately begging a place for scraps of dignity. She felt wanted, not as a woman with a ruined reputation, not as someone broken, but as someone who could belong somewhere again. And neither she nor Caleb had any idea that before the week ended, everything between them, their safety, their dignity, their place in the world, would face a test neither of them deserved. The next 2 days moved with the tension of a storm building over the prairie, quiet, thick, charged with something you could feel long before you saw it. Evelyn carried on with her work, but every task felt heavier under the weight of the deadline. Friday, 2 days until the collectors came to strip what remained of her life. 2 days until the town had another excuse to look at her like she was nothing more than a discarded scrap. Caleb tried to pretend he wasn't watching her with concern, but he failed miserably. Every time she passed by, arms full of laundry or hands busy kneading dough, his eyes tracked her, softly, quietly, filled with something deeper than simple employer responsibility. That evening, after the children were asleep, Evelyn sat on the back steps, rubbing her arms against the cool night breeze. She watched fireflies spark in the grass, little bursts of light against the dark. She felt like one of them, trying to shine despite everything around her determined to put her out. She didn't hear Caleb approach until he stepped beside her, hands tucked in his pockets. You should be inside, he murmured. Nights are still cold. I can't sleep, she whispered. He lowered himself onto the step next to her. They didn't speak for a moment. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was almost comforting, like two people sitting beside the same burden, knowing it didn't need words to be understood. Debt collectors are men, Evelyn, Caleb said finally. Not wolves. They can be reasoned with. She shook her head. Not these ones. My ex-husband owed money to the worst kind of people. They'll take whatever they can from me, even if it ruins me. Then they'll answer to me first. She looked at him sharply. Caleb, no. I won't let you get involved. You're working under my roof. Anyone coming for you has to go through me. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, she whispered. Caleb exhaled slowly, gaze fixed on the yard. I'm not trying to frighten you, Evelyn. But protecting the people under this roof, that's what a man is supposed to do. A lump rose in her throat. I'm not family. He turned toward her, eyes steady. Not yet. Those 2 words hit her like a tremor. She lowered her gaze, heart thudding hard enough to hurt. Caleb stood after a moment and offered his hand. Come on. You should rest. Tomorrow will sort itself out. She hesitated, then slipped her hand into his. His grip was firm, warm, grounding. When she rose to her feet, she realized just how close they were. So close she could feel the heat of him in the cool night air. He didn't pull away. Neither did she. But then he cleared his throat softly, stepped back, and guided her toward the door. "Good night, Evelyn." "Good night, Caleb." Sleep came easier than she expected. The next morning brought no mercy. The sun rose sharp and bright, as if mocking the heaviness inside her. She worked through breakfast, trying to mask the tremble in her hands, but Caleb noticed. He always noticed. "Go into town with me," he said quietly once the children were playing outside. "We're settling this." "Caleb, no. It's not a request." He had already put on his coat before she could argue. The firmness in his tone wasn't harsh. It was protective. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to stand between her and the world. The ride into town was silent at first. Evelyn sat beside him on the wagon seat, fingers twisting together. Caleb kept one hand steady on the reins, the other resting loosely on his thigh. Close enough that she felt the warmth, close enough that she felt protected, but not possessive. Not claiming. Just present. "Did you love him?" Caleb asked suddenly. She blinked. "Who?" "Your husband." The wind carried the question away, leaving behind a strange stillness. Evelyn swallowed. "I thought I did. Until I realized he only married me for the land my aunt left me. When it was gone, so was he." A muscle in Caleb's jaw flexed. "A man who takes advantage of a woman like that isn't a man at all. He used to say I wasn't worth keeping, that I wasn't enough for him, that someone like me should be grateful for whatever scraps I got." Caleb's grip tightened on the reins, knuckles pale. "Evelyn, look at me." She did. "You don't owe that man a damn thing. Not his mistakes. Not his debts. Not his cruelty." Her throat tightened. "Then why does it still feel like I do?" "Because no one ever stood up for you." His voice was low, steady. "Not until now." The confession wrapped around her like a warm coat, unexpected and comforting. When they reached town, Evelyn's fear returned in full force. The dead office sat on a corner near the hotel, a squat, ugly building with barred windows and a sign that looked more like a threat than a business. Two men stood outside, arms crossed, eyes sharp. They noticed her immediately. Well, one of them drawled. "The runaway wife comes home." Evelyn froze. Caleb stepped off the wagon, planting himself between her and them so quickly the men actually flinched. "You speak to her with respect," Caleb warned, voice low and cold. The taller man smirked. "Or what?" Caleb stepped closer. "Or you'll find out." The shorter one raised his hands. "Look, we ain't here to start trouble. The woman owes on a debt, that's all." "She doesn't," Caleb said firmly. "Her husband does. And he's long gone. You'll be dealing with me from now on." The men exchanged looks, surprised, uncertain. Caleb held their stare without blinking. "You're not taking anything from her. Not her belongings. Not her money. Not her dignity. And what makes you think you can speak for her?" The tall one spat. Caleb's voice dropped into something dangerous. "Because she works for me, lives under my roof, and I protect what's mine." Evelyn felt the world tilt. Not because he claimed ownership, but because he claimed responsibility, care, shelter. She wasn't a burden to him. She wasn't a stain. She was someone worth standing in front of. After a long moment, the shorter man sighed. "Fine. We'll take the file back to the judge. But don't expect this to be over." Caleb took a step closer. "It is over. Now get off my land." "Our land," the tall one scoffed. "She's on it," Caleb said. "That's enough." The men left, grumbling, but they left. Evelyn's knees weakened. Caleb turned to her, his anger shifting instantly to concern. "You all right?" She nodded shakily. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said softly. "I did." She swallowed hard, emotion swelling until she could barely speak. "Caleb, why?" He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because you deserve someone in your corner." And then, without touching her, He said the words that would change everything. They can call you whatever cruel names they want. But I know who you are. You're a woman with a good heart, a strong spine, and more courage than any of them. You deserve a fresh start, with someone who sees you for who you are. Her chest tightened. Her breath hitched. He wasn't confessing anything, but he was saying enough. Enough to make her realize she didn't want to run again. Enough to make her realize she wanted to stay with him. And neither of them saw the danger waiting just around the corner. Danger that would come for her, for the ranch, and for the growing bond neither had dared to name yet. The house smelled of simmering stew and cornbread when they walked in, the kind of smell that made a body feel anchored, welcomed, and safe without even trying. Grace paused inside the doorway, letting the warmth roll over her skin. It was strange how quickly a place that wasn't hers could make her heart ache like it had been hers all along. Caleb brushed past her, hanging his coat, boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. He didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. There was something in the air between them, something unspoken, something warming and terrifying at the same time. "You sit," he said finally, nodding at the table. "You're tired, and you've had more hurt tossed at you in one day than most folks get in a year." Grace obeyed, though a flicker of discomfort tugged at her ribs. She wasn't used to being told to rest. She wasn't used to anyone noticing she needed it. She certainly wasn't used to a man giving her kindness without expecting anything in return. Caleb ladled stew into 2 bowls, sliding one in front of her. When he sat down across from her, the chair creaked beneath his weight, a sound that somehow added more comfort than silence ever could. For a long moment, they ate without a word. Spoon scraping, fire popping, wind breathing against the windows. Grace let it all settle inside her. But of course, quiet never lasted forever. "Grace," Caleb said softly, voice lowering like he didn't want to startle the moment. "I want to ask you something. And you can say no. You can say anything you want. I won't push." She raised her eyes. He wasn't looking at her the way other men had looked at her. Not with judgment. Not with suspicion. Not with contempt dressed up as concern. He looked at her like he was looking through the past she carried, not at it. "What is it?" she asked. Caleb inhaled slowly, choosing his words with care. "Who was the first one to call you that name?" He swallowed. "Used goods." Her breath hitched. Of all things she expected him to ask, that wasn't one. That word, those 2 awful, rusty words, had clung to her for so long she didn't even question their weight anymore. They'd become part of her shadow. Grace lowered her spoon, hands trembling slightly. "People in town," she whispered. "Women who didn't like that my husband looked at other girls. Men who thought my quiet made me weak. Folks who just needed someone easy to blame." She swallowed hard. But hearing it from them wasn't the worst part. Caleb's eyes softened. Who was the worst? She hesitated. Her lungs tightened. Her heart clawed at her chest, begging her not to say it. But this house felt safe. This man felt real, honest, strong in a way that didn't take strength from anyone else. "My husband," Grace murmured. He said it first. He said it loudest. And he said it last. Caleb's jaw clenched so hard the muscle jumped. "He wronged you," he said low and steady, "in ways a man ought to face consequences for." Grace looked down at her bowl. "He never hit me. People think that means he treated me fine." She blinked fast, but words bruised deeper, longer. Caleb's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I know." That stopped her. She lifted her gaze. "You do?" He nodded slowly. "Martha, my wife, she passed with illness. But before that, when the fever took her mind, she said things she never meant." His eyes dimmed with old pain. "Sometimes I think I still hear her. Sometimes I think I deserved it, even though I know it was the sickness talking." Grace watched him carefully. "Caleb, you didn't deserve that. And you didn't deserve what was done to you," he said firmly. The room went still. Not empty, just still. Like the world had drawn its breath for them. Grace reached up, brushing away a tear she hadn't felt fall. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. "I thought being a wife would give me worth. I thought if I stayed quiet and gentle and useful, people would accept me. But the more I tried to prove myself, the more they pushed me away. Caleb leaned forward, voice soft but unshakable. You don't have to prove anything here. Not to me. Not to my kids. Not to anyone. But you don't even know me, she said weakly. I know enough. His eyes held her steady. I know you've got a heart bigger than what they handled. I know you're stronger than the things they said about you. And I know this house feels different with you in it. Grace's pulse jumped. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected any of this. The wind howled outside. The lantern flickered. Grace felt her whole world trembling, not from fear, but from possibility. Caleb straightened slightly, clearing his throat. Let me ask you one more thing. Grace nodded. Do you want to stay here? His voice gentled even more. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because you want a fresh start. Because you deserve one. Grace's chest tightened. Tears gathered again. But for the first time all day, they weren't from hurt. They were from hope. She swallowed. I don't want to be alone tonight. Or tomorrow. Or for a long while. Caleb's lips tugged into the smallest, warmest smile. Then don't be. Something unlocked inside her. Something she didn't know had a key. The front door creaked softly, and Beck, Caleb's eldest, peeked in with his siblings behind him. Pa, he asked sleepily. We heard voices. Everything okay? Caleb glanced at Grace before answering. Everything's better than okay, he said gently. We've got company. Good company. The kids entered with curious eyes, soft smiles, open hearts. Grace exhaled shakily. For the first time in years, she felt chosen. Not used. Not discarded. Not judged. Chosen. Grace didn't sleep much that night. Not because she was restless, but because her mind wouldn't let go of the small, quiet moments she'd witnessed inside Caleb's home. How Beck had gently nudged his brother to give Grace the bigger cup of milk. How little Annie had shyly touched Grace's dress, whispering, "You smell like flowers," as if it were the highest compliment in the world. How Caleb had quietly placed an extra quilt at the foot of her bed, murmuring, "It gets cold in this room. Just in case." She'd never had a just in case offered to her before. Just in case you get cold. Just in case you need comfort. Just in case you need something that isn't asked in return. By dawn, she sat at the window, watching soft amber lights stretch over the ranch. The sunrise felt different from the ones she'd seen in her old life. This one felt like an invitation, gentle, warm, almost shy. Footsteps creaked outside her door. "Grace," Caleb's low voice called. "You awake?" She wiped her eyes, tears she didn't remember shedding, and stood. "Yes, come in." When he opened the door, he looked hesitant, as if worried he might have crossed a boundary. But when he saw her standing there, hands folded in front of her, something eased in his expression. Relief, maybe, or something deeper. "I didn't want to start chores without asking if you'd like to join us," he said. "Only if you want to." Grace smiled, small but real. "I'd like that." "Good," he said softly, and she could swear she saw sunlight catch in his eyes before he stepped back. She followed him to the kitchen, where the children were eating breakfast, simple, warm, lively. The kind of table filled with sounds she'd always dreamed of but never dared hope for. "Good morning, Miss Grace," Annie chirped, swinging her legs. Grace chuckled. "Good morning." Caleb poured her coffee. She noticed he placed it beside her right hand, exactly where she'd put her cup last night, as if he'd paid attention. She warmed at the thought. "Pa," Beck asked with a frown, "are the cows still acting funny?" Uncle Reed said they might be sensing coyotes again. Caleb nodded. "They might. We'll check the fences today." And Grace. She looked up, and he gentled his voice again. "Don't feel you have to do a thing. You're our guest." The word hit her somewhere tender. Guest. Not burden. Not problem. Not woman who needed to earn her keep just to be tolerated. But she shook her head lightly. "No, I want to help. Truly. I've always wanted to be useful in ways that matter." Beck grinned. "Then you can ride with Pa and me." Caleb lifted a brow at his son. "We'll see." Grace might prefer something less rough. I can handle rough, she said before thinking. Caleb's eyes sparkled with the smallest, unexpected hint of amusement. I'm sure you can. After breakfast, they stepped outside into crisp morning air. The horses were already saddled. Caleb must have done it before checking on Grace. He handed her the reins of a brown mare with a white blaze. This here is Daisy, he said. Gentle enough for any rider. Grace stroked the mare's neck. Daisy whinnied softly, leaning into her palm as if she'd been waiting for her all along. I love her, Grace whispered. Caleb's voice deepened. She can tell good hearts. Her cheeks warmed. They rode toward the pasture, the ranch stretching wide beneath the sky. Grace had never been given space before, space to breathe, space to feel, space to exist without shrinking herself. Caleb rode close enough for her to feel safe without feeling watched. You ride well, he observed. My father taught me when I was young, she said. He used to say, a woman who knows how to ride can choose when to run and when to stay. That's wise, Caleb murmured. I think he meant I should know I had choices. I didn't always remember that. She paused, glancing at him. I think I do now. Caleb held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. I'm glad. When they reached the north fence, Beck hopped off, checking the posts. Caleb dismounted beside Grace, watching her with a quiet attentiveness that made her pulse race. You doing all right? He asked. Yes, she breathed. Better than all right. He nodded once, almost as if reassuring himself. Good. They worked side by side, Beck hauling small tools, Caleb hammering loose boards, Grace holding nails and steadying posts. It felt natural, almost too natural, like they'd done it 100 times before instead of meeting only yesterday. After an hour, Caleb wiped sweat from his brow and looked at her, expression thoughtful. Grace. She looked up. I want to understand something, he said, voice dropping. Not because I need to know, but because I think you deserve to say it to someone who won't turn it against you. Her breath caught. All right. When your husband called you those names, when townsfolk treated you poorly, what did you feel? Truthfully. Grace swallowed, throat tightening. She'd never spoken it out loud, not even to herself. I felt small, she whispered. Like I was fading a little every day, and no one would have noticed if I disappeared entirely. I felt like I was contaminated, like something was wrong with me. Her eyes burned, like maybe they were right. Caleb's jaw clenched. They were not right. But you don't even know me fully, she said weakly. I know enough, he said firmly. I know what I saw the moment I found you on that road. Her breath trembled. What did you see? Caleb stepped closer, slowly, respectfully, but close enough that she felt the heat of him, the steadiness of him. A woman with a bruised spirit but an unbroken soul, he said quietly. A woman who deserved better than the men and women who failed her. He paused. A woman worth respecting, worth choosing. Her throat closed. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not once in her whole life. Daisy flicked her tail. Beck hammered another nail. The wind brushed against the fields. Yet everything else seemed to move while she stood frozen in Caleb's gentle truth. She took a shaky breath. Caleb. He didn't touch her, didn't even reach for her, but she'd never felt someone's presence more strongly. His voice softened to a whisper. Grace, you're not used goods. You never were. And you never will be. Not here. Not with me. Something inside her cracked. Finally, mercifully, in a way that let new air in where old wounds had been. And for the first time in years, Grace truly believed she wasn't broken. Grace spent the next few days learning the rhythm of Caleb's household. Each morning brought chores and lessons, but also something she hadn't known she needed. Purpose that didn't feel like a burden, and kindness that didn't come with strings. The children were an endless source of chaos and joy. Beck insisted she ride beside him while checking the fences, giving her playful jabs and teasing that made her laugh despite herself. Annie and little Sam clung to her skirts, asking questions about everything. The horses, the tools, even Caleb's old photographs scattered in the parlor. Grace found herself answering patiently, discovering a maternal instinct she didn't know she had. She realized the children were teaching her how to feel again, how to care without fear, how to trust without warning signs flashing in her mind. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and pink, Caleb approached her in the pasture. His eyes, usually steady and unreadable, held something softer, almost hesitant. "Grace," he said, his voice low, "there's something I need to ask you." She looked up from brushing Daisy's mane, heart tightening with anticipation. I want you to know," he began, "that you're safe here. That no one will ever hurt you again, not if I can help it." Her chest tightened at the words, a mixture of fear and hope tangled together. "But," he continued, hesitating slightly, "I also need to know if you'd consider staying. For more than just a few days." Grace's hand froze mid-stroke. The question, simple as it was, carried weight she hadn't anticipated. Staying, not leaving, not fleeing from the judgment of others. She started, then stopped. Her throat ached as she thought of her past life. The loneliness, the cruelty, the endless feeling of being unwanted. And yet, here was a man offering her safety, acceptance, and choice. "I'd like that," she whispered, barely audible. Caleb's lips curved into a small, relieved smile. He stepped closer, close enough that the warmth of him brushed her shoulder. "Good. I'd like that too." The wind rustled through the tall grass, and for a moment, the world felt suspended. The scent of the earth, the horses, and the fading sun wrapped around them. That evening, after supper, the children were asleep in their rooms, leaving Grace and Caleb alone by the fire. The flames danced in his eyes as he sat across from her, silent at first. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about how life treats people, how it can be cruel without reason." Grace nodded. She didn't trust her voice to speak yet. "And I've also been thinking about choices," he continued. "How sometimes the right choice doesn't come easy. But when it does, you recognize it." Her heart pounded. She sensed the direction of his words, the unspoken meaning between them. "Grace," he said finally, leaning forward slightly, "I choose you. Not just for a few days. Not just to help me or the children. I choose you, if you'll let me." Tears pricked at her eyes. But this time, they weren't born of pain. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of something she hadn't felt in years, being truly seen. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Then don't say anything," he said gently. "Just stay." And she did. That night, as she lay in the guest room Caleb had prepared for her, Grace stared at the ceiling and realized something profound. She had been broken, yes, but not irreparably. She had been abandoned, yes, but not unloved. And in the quiet, glowing warmth of the ranch, with the soft breathing of children down the hall and the distant sound of Caleb tending the horses outside, Grace finally allowed herself to hope. To hope for a life she could build, not one she was forced into. To hope for love that didn't demand perfection, but simply presence. To hope that the wounds of her past could heal, not vanish entirely, but fade enough to let joy in. And for the first time in years, Grace slept without fear, knowing that she had found a place where she belonged. Morning came with a golden haze over the ranch. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay, horses, and dew-soaked grass. Grace rose early, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to be a part of this life. She dressed quietly and stepped outside, where the children were already running barefoot across the yard, laughing as the chickens scattered in flurry. Beck noticed her first. "Morning, Miss Grace," he called, waving a hand. His smile was contagious, and she found herself grinning in return. "Morning, Beck," she replied, her voice soft. Annie and Sam soon joined, chattering about who had seen the biggest rooster or the fastest horse. Grace let them drag her along, laughing as they led her to the barn. The chaos of their energy was exhausting, but in a good way, a reminder that life, even when messy, was full of joy. Caleb appeared a moment later, leaning against the barn door, arms crossed. His expression softened when he saw her with the children, hair mussed from play, cheeks flushed. "You fit right in," he said, nodding toward the scene. Grace turned, catching his gaze. "It feels right," she admitted. He took a step closer. "Good," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "Because you're not leaving." A shiver of warmth ran through her. She could feel the weight of those words, the finality, the promise. This wasn't a fleeting kindness or temporary shelter. This was a life being offered, whole and unjudged. The day passed in a rhythm of work and laughter. Grace helped with chores, fed the animals, and taught the children their lessons. Beck kept asking questions about everything, from the way the horses' hooves made patterns in the mud to why the sky turned pink at sunset. Caleb watched her quietly from time to time, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made her heart flutter. It wasn't just attraction, it was respect, care, and a kind of awe she hadn't been used to. Later, while the children napped, Caleb and Grace walked along the ridge behind the house. The wind played with their hair, and the valley below shimmered in the late afternoon light. "You've done more for these kids in a week than anyone else in months," Caleb said quietly. "They're starting to trust again. And so am I." Grace hesitated, feeling the weight of his words. "I didn't think I could be needed. Not anymore." "You were," he said, stopping and turning to face her. "And you are. Grace, I don't just want you here because the kids need you. I want you here because I need you. All of you." Her chest tightened. She had lived years thinking she was unwanted, disposable even. And now, here was a man, steady and unwavering, telling her she was needed, not as a caretaker, not as a charity, but as someone irreplaceable. "Caleb," she breathed, tears threatening to spill. He took her hand gently. "I know it's fast. I know it's a lot. But I can't pretend I haven't been feeling this from the start. You make this place whole." Her heart swelled. For so long, she had been hiding, protecting herself from disappointment. Now, she felt a courage she hadn't known existed, a courage to allow herself to be loved fully, without apology. They stood there, hand in hand, looking at the fading sun together. Grace realized that life didn't have to be lonely or cruel. She could have joy, she could have love, and she could build a family, not the one she had lost, but one she could choose, with people who truly wanted her there. When they returned to the house, the children were awake, eager for stories and supper. Grace moved among them, teaching, laughing, and learning in return. Caleb lingered in the doorway, watching her, his heart full of gratitude and hope. That night, as the stars sparkled overhead and the wind whispered through the trees, Grace stood on the porch with Caleb. No words were needed. The silence spoke volumes. It was a silence of understanding, of trust, and of a bond that was growing stronger every day. Grace knew, deep in her heart, that she had found more than just safety here. She had found home. And with Caleb by her side, the wounds of her past began to feel smaller, softer, more manageable, like they were finally being cradled by something stronger than pain. The night stretched on, quiet and calm, carrying with it a promise that no matter what the past had taken from her, this new life was hers to hold, and she would never have to face it alone. Morning broke with a soft, golden light spilling over the ranch. Grace woke to the sound of the children whispering and giggling in the next room, already planning some new adventure. She smiled, feeling the warmth of belonging settle in her chest. For the first time in years, mornings weren't just another day to endure, they were full of promise. Caleb had risen before her, as usual, already saddling one of the horses for the day's chores. He looked up when he noticed her stepping outside. "Morning, Grace," he said, his voice rough from sleep but tender all the same. "Morning," she replied, adjusting her shawl. She felt a flutter of excitement. Today felt different, heavier with the unspoken acknowledgement that her life had changed forever. The children ran to her, tugging her hand and insisting she help them feed the animals. Beck chattered endlessly about the chickens. Annie wanted to braid the horse's mane, and Sam clung to her, asking questions about everything. Grace laughed, letting herself be pulled into their chaos, reveling in the warmth and noise. Caleb watched her quietly, his heart swelling at the sight. She moved among them with ease, with patience, with love, and he realized she wasn't just healing the children. She was healing him too. The house, the land, even the air seemed lighter when she was near. As the morning turned to noon, Caleb suggested a ride to the far pasture to check on the fences and the herd. Grace hesitated, unsure if she was ready to confront the vastness of the land so soon, but Caleb's hand gently pressed hers. "We'll go slow," he said, "together." The ride was quiet at first. The wind tousled her hair, and the rhythmic clop of the horse's hooves created a soothing cadence. Grace's thoughts drifted to her past, the husband who had sold her, the betrayal, the night spent wondering if anyone would ever truly see her worth. And then she looked at Caleb, at the children laughing behind her, and felt a strange, comforting certainty. She had been seen. She had been chosen. "You're quiet today," Caleb remarked, glancing at her. "Just thinking," she said softly. He nodded, understanding that some thoughts couldn't be rushed. "It's okay," he said. "You don't have to speak every thought out loud. I'll understand." The children galloped ahead, their laughter echoing across the pasture. Grace felt a lightness in her chest she hadn't known in years. For the first time, she believed that life could be tender and full of love, that she didn't have to hide her heart behind walls built from pain. By late afternoon, they reached the farthest fence line. Caleb dismounted first, helping Grace off her horse. The land stretched endlessly, rolling hills kissed by sunlight, dotted with wildflowers. Grace inhaled deeply, the scent of earth and grass filling her senses. "You see that?" Caleb asked, pointing to the horizon. "That's where new beginnings start. Every day, every choice, it all matters. And right now, we get to decide what this life looks like." Grace turned to him, her eyes glistening. "And you're here with me," she whispered. "Always," he replied, his voice steady. He reached for her hand, and this time there was no hesitation. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like they had always belonged together. The ride back was filled with small laughter, shared glances, and quiet words of reassurance. When they reached the barn, the sun was setting, casting everything in shades of amber and gold. Grace felt a profound sense of peace. She had come from a life of rejection, betrayal, and sorrow, yet here she was, seen, wanted, and safe. That night, as the stars blinked awake overhead, the ranch was alive with the gentle hum of life. The children slept soundly, exhausted from the day's adventures. Grace and Caleb sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping warm tea. "You know," Grace said, leaning her head on his shoulder, "I never thought I'd get this chance. To be part of a family, to be loved this way." Caleb's arm tightened around her. "You've earned it," he said quietly. "Every step, every scar, every heartbreak, it led you here. And now, we face the future together." Grace smiled, a mixture of gratitude and hope filling her heart. She had survived loss, betrayal, and fear. Now, with Caleb by her side and the children around her, she felt strong enough to embrace the life she had once only dreamed of. The night stretched on, peaceful and unwavering. Grace felt the comforting truth of her new life. One where love wasn't conditional, where family wasn't just blood, and where hope was no longer something fragile, but something tangible, present, and real. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the ranch lull her into a deep, contented sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, and new moments to cherish. But tonight, she was home. And that, she realized, was everything.